The federal government is stepping in to end the lockouts holding up ports on either side of the country. Today, Labour Minister Stephen McKinnon sent labour disputes at the Port of Montreal and in Vancouver to binding arbitration.
I view actions to restore order, reasonable actions to restore order in our supply chains as being pro-worker. I do not like reading of layoffs. I do not like hearing of instability. And obviously we want to make sure that our economy continues to function, that our trading relationships continue to function.
Today's actions also end a more than 2-year lockout at the Port of Quebec, where replacement workers have been operating that facility. So is Ottawa protecting the Canadian economy from labour action or curtailing workers' rights? The Canadian Union of Public Employees represents workers at the Port of Montreal and the Port of Quebec. Mark Hancock is the CUPE national president, and he joins me now. Mark Hancock, it's good to see you. Thank you for being here today.
Great to be here again. Thanks, David.
The Labour Minister, Steve McKinnon, said intervening in disputes like he did today is pro-worker because it protects the jobs throughout the economy and the supply chain. What's your response to that?
I couldn't disagree more. I just actually was on the phone with the minister about half an hour ago and expressed my deep concern, our deep concern with their actions. In fact, this action that they're taking, it's my understanding that it has never been used until August of last year when it was used against the Teamsters. I expressed my concern not only for these three groups, the two that we represent, and of course the longshore workers in British Columbia, but this is sending a message to workers in the federal sector, and I'm really concerned about the long-term consequences of this action.
When you look at, though, just the Port of Montreal alone, sir, more than $400 million of goods a day coming in, the ripple effect of that throughout the Canadian economy with the changes and the protectionism happening in the United States. I mean, when you look at that, can the federal government really allow the labor disruption to go on?
Yeah, no, and I get it, right? And we want a strong economy as much as anybody does. Our members that work there, our members are 750,000 members across this country. You know, we need to have a strong economy in order to support public services, and that's something that we're engaged in all the time. But in this case, we had a very limited job action at this point in the Port of Montreal. And let's not forget, and you said it yourself, the Port of Quebec had been locked out by members in the Port of Quebec for over 2 years now, and we've seen nothing from the minister on that action until now. And with the Port of Montreal, we had very limited action, and in fact, we were totally obeying essential services, which were worked out in the last dispute that we had a few years ago. And we were willing to go back to full services at the port if the employer just left the scheduling the way it was prior to the start of this. And that would give us all time to go through the bargaining process. But here's what happened. The employer decided, okay, we're going to play this trick again on the government. We're going to lock out those workers. Then we're going to tell the government and the country how bad things are and demand that they bring action. And it's like them, you know, punching one of the kids in the head and then going to mom and dad and asking them to fix it. It's really quite incredible that the government's fallen for this again.
Right. Look, I take your point that the Port Quebec situation was allowed to go on for more than 2 years. But in terms of its importance to the national economy, I say this with no disrespect to the city of Quebec and the Port of Quebec, but the Port of Montreal is an entirely different economic animal. And I wonder, Mark Hancock, the employer in Montreal said it offered a compensation package over 4 years that would raise total compensation for the average worker in Montreal to more than $200,000. Now, I know that wouldn't all be salary. Some of that's benefits and costs to the employer, but is that an accurate description of what your workers turned down?
I really don't know. I'm not at the bargaining table. We have 2,100 locals, 4,000 agreements across the country. Of course, I'm paying attention to this one just like I am. But what I do know is the case in the Port of Quebec as well as in Montreal, that this is not about money. Of course, money is important, benefits are important, but this is around work-life balance. And my members having the ability to spend time with their families. Right now, the way shift scheduling is done at both those ports just does not allow that to happen. And that's the problem with this being shipped off to a mediator, arbitrator, is that they're not going to deal with those types of issues. They're going to deal with the simple issues of wages, benefits, and a few other things like that. When it comes to scheduling, when it comes to work-life balance, an arbitrator simply is not going to deal with those. And then once again, we're left up to a point that issue is not being dealt with in this round of bargaining, and it'll come up down the road in the next round of bargaining again, and we'll go through all of this once more.
So Stephen McKinnon said today that it didn't look to him like a deal was possible in the short to medium term. Do you agree with that characterization, or do you believe there was hope for a deal to get done?
I think we were a ways from getting a deal, but as I said earlier, we were willing to go back to full 100% shifts work at the Port of Montreal if the employer just agreed to maintain the shifts that we had prior to this dispute happening. If things went back to where they were 2 months ago as far as the shifts, my members would be at work right now, and this wouldn't be an issue. It would give us the time to negotiate a collective agreement that worked for the port and worked for my members.
So here we are, though. There's a playbook, right, that the employer imposes a lockout and asks the federal government for binding arbitration, and it's gotten it. This is now a series of these, dealing mostly with critical economic infrastructure, ports and rail, where this has happened. What do you make of this in terms of what it means for workers' rights, and does it suggest maybe there needs to be a new way of resolving labor situations involving these economically critical areas?
Well, fundamental to workers and unions is the right to withdraw our services, is the right to strike. Of course, we are very cognizant and agree and support essential services where needed in many sectors, of course, like healthcare and a variety, including this sector. We agreed with, and we have essential services in place. But what you have, and we're very good at negotiating collective agreements. Like I just said, we have over 4,000 collective agreements across this country and very few disputes. And our members in Montreal don't want to be on strike. Our members in Quebec don't want to be locked out. Same with the Montreal, locked out. They want to be doing the jobs that they love doing, the work that they enjoy doing. Working on the port is something that they enjoy doing. And they want to be able to provide for their families, especially as we're heading into late November and the Christmas season. Nobody wants to be on strike. Nobody wants to be locked out. But in this case, this employer, once again, is playing that game, crying to the federal government that, they locked us out, and now the federal government has to act. And that's the real problem here. Like I said, we can get a collective agreement. We've got great staff. We've got great leadership. We know how to negotiate.
Well, look, I'm in a union. I've been on a picket line. I was locked out, years ago in my career, and I hated every minute of it. But typically when a union withdraws its services, it wages almost like it's economic warfare against its employer. But in a situation like the ports, the ripple effect is so profound, and there's so much collateral damage. It creates an urgency for the federal government to act. So I just wonder, Mark Hancock, as a final point, does there need to be some sort of model to deal with these sorts of disputes so that your scheduling issues and all the other issues can be dealt with without the government having to take these actions and without the economic consequence of all the other sectors affected by it?
Well, I'm happy to look at these. My members, my locals are happy to look at this. And the minister actually offered that. And I said, well, it's a little bit too late for this particular situation.
Right.
I'm always happy to meet with employers, with governments, to talk about the best way to move forward. And sometimes negotiations can be extremely difficult. There's personalities in play, there's different interests. It's not an easy process to get through. But like I said, we're good at getting collective agreements. And I also said to the minister, I wish he'd have given me a call before they had taken this action. And maybe we could have had that meeting prior to him, imposing this, sending this off to the Federal Industrial Board. Now where we're at. We've got to go challenge this in court once again, and we're very good at that too. We'll win this. It'll take years to get through the process. My members in Montreal, we're going to work with them and see how they respond, and we'll work very closely with them on how to respond with whether it's the courts or whatever the case may be. But we're in this situation because the federal government bought into a pack of BS from the employers.
Okay. On that challenge, just as a final point, I know the Teamsters and others from what happened last year are also doing this, but this, as you say, this is going to take years. This is not something that's going to be resolved before this arbitration process. So you're kind of stuck with the hand you've been dealt right now, and it's about ruling this out for future conflicts by going to court. Am I correct in my understanding there?
Well, and there's redress, quite often
right.
There's redress paid to workers and those facts. But yeah, sometimes it can be a decade after by the time when you go through all the different steps in the Court of Appeals and what have you. But, governments haven't learned. And, some governments get it, but many haven't. Remember when Doug Ford imposed a collective agreement on those 55,000 education workers in Ontario just a few years ago? And those education workers bravely said no. And they opposed the law in that case. And that was 4 days. It took Premier to promise that he was going to withdraw that legislation, kill that legislation. So workers have had enough, not just in this industry, but all across the country and the globe. And we'll see what happens. But I think I think government's got to start paying attention to what workers are thinking and their needs more than they have in the past.
Mark Hancock, CUPE National President, thank you for your time today, sir.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
Okay, let's bring in the Tuesday Power Panel and start on this topic. Shachi Kurl is the president of the Angus Reid Institute. Amanda Alvaro is a former Liberal Party communication strategist. Françoise Boivin is a former NDP MP. And here with me in the studio, Kate Harrison is a conservative political analyst. Shachi, let's start with you. The Labour, I was going to call him the Prime Minister. I almost promoted Stephen McKinnon. The Labour Minister said...
And he would.
It's a separate conversation. The Labour Minister, to correctly title him, says there's not a lot of public appetite for disruptions that affect the economy like this. Like, I appreciate being in a union yourself. You want to be able to negotiate your own deals, but boy, the ripple effect of these lockouts, these disruptions are profound. What do you make of the move the government's doing here? Have they read the mood right?
Yeah, well, once again, the Liberal government is in a situation where it is trying to walk a line and maybe ends up alienating everybody. But, you know, it's familiar territory when you are the government of the day trying to deal with two things. First of all, there is no path to victory in a future election for Justin Trudeau and the Liberals unless they're able to convince more left-leaning voters to come back into or to join the Liberal movement, such that it is and such as what's left of it. And so they can't be seen to be alienating union members and the Labour vote. That is going to be a problem for them. At the same time, competence is going to be an issue. And you can just hear the attack ads and the one-liners from Pierre Poilievre and the Conservatives the longer major port disruptions linger on, saying, look, this is a government that you know, it can't manage this business. It's not competent when it comes to, if not keeping the trains rolling on time, then at least keeping the ships coming in on time. And you combine that with we're how many shopping weeks away from Christmas now, and the notion that consumers, while they generally, you know, tend to support union members in disputes, right, and they support people's rights to be in unions and they see the benefit, they don't necessarily see the benefit when all the stuff they ordered is either stuck in a container or isn't arriving, and that becomes, you know, they cannot afford an attack ad, the Liberals, that say, well, they're the Grinch that stole Christmas, and that is first and foremost for them.
So Amanda, this is the challenge that the Liberals find themselves in. Look, they got to get back on track and smooth riding in the political lane for the next election, but the governing lane requires some tough decisions. And this was one today, right? To do this, to send it to binding arbitration. What are your thoughts on these developments?
Yeah, well, I think that, listen, the goal obviously is always to try to reach an agreement at the bargaining table, but I think that the comments that have been expressed are really true. I mean, Canadians do not have a lot of appetite for anything that seems to be hindering our economic interests or our national interests. I think Sachi made a ton of really good points about not just consumers who don't want their presents delayed, but also all of the small and mid-sized businesses who would be at risk for their shipments up at this critical time, and thousands of workers that could be laid off leading into the holidays. Like, all of that is such a recipe for disaster. So I agree the government does have to walk this line, but when you're in a position where the labor stoppages and the disputes have gone on and it's a paralyzed situation where there seems to be no potential for a good outcome in sight. We had 99.7% of members on Sunday in the Port of Montreal who voted against the proposed agreement. I mean, they are worlds away from one another. So I think that there's an expectation from Canadians that the federal government will step in when it's necessary to make sure that these agreements are reached, or to make sure that labor stoppages don't go on, so that we can enjoy the benefit of making sure that all of our imports are coming in through these shipping ports, and making sure that we don't have extra layoffs leading into the holidays.
You know, but Kate, this is we've seen this playbook now playing out, right? From the rail strike, or the rail lockout, excuse me. I keep saying strike, I mean lockout, to the ports, where the employer locks them out, says, hey, government, we need this, and then they get the binding arbitration, and they escape having to do collective bargaining. I mean, what are your thoughts on what this means?
Yeah, well, first I just want to disclose that our company works for ILW Canada, which was impacted by the decision today. As
one of the unions in Vancouver.
That's
right.
correct.
Okay.
I think we can't separate the conversation around economic benefits for consumers with that from economic benefits for workers. And this is a real political mess for Trudeau, because it is workers that got him elected. To Shachi's point, it is workers that will get him re-elected. So to use, in my view, the bluntest instrument in the tool belt with Section 107 is a deliberate choice. And it's because, David, he doesn't want to do the work of going to the House of Commons and seeking approval for back-to-work legislation.
Who would support that, though, in the House right now, with the filibuster going on?
But
right?
Isn't that exactly the point? At least with that, there's a democratic choice that's being made and an option to parties to express their viewpoints. You don't have that with CARB. You don't have that with Section 107. So it would be nice to see where the parties stand on this issue when faced with the question, particular Jagmeet Singh, who has, in my view, abandoned workers, because we've now had 2 instances where Section 107 has been used as a blunt tool to get workers back to work as opposed to reaching an agreement at the table. So I think they're using an undemocratic tool to do this, and the politics of it are equally messy, because this is a group that Trudeau ostensibly would be relying on in order to get reelected, and he has abandoned them just as Jagmeet Singh has.
So, Françoise, I was just talking to Mark Hancock with CUPE about this. I'm in a union here at the CBC and the Canadian Media Guild. I have been locked out. I hated it. It was awful. But the ripple effect through the national economy when I was on a picket line was not devastating. You know what I mean? I'm very replaceable. The ports being locked down damages so many other people inside the supply chain. I mean, is it time to rethink just how these critical bits of economic infrastructure are managed from a labor relations front, so it doesn't get to this point and it becomes a political choice? So some sort of system, whether they automatically kind of go to an arbitrative process or something, so that they can get their issues dealt with, the workers, without having to get into a situation where the national economy is threatened by this.
Well, like they've done for police people. I mean, police men, police women cannot strike in Quebec, at least. I don't know the other provinces, because of the type of work that they do. So it is a forced arbitration, and they've been working well, and the arbitrator has to review everything, because I heard Mr. Hancock saying, well, a forced arbitration will touch mostly salaries and so on and so forth. But technically, if you force a binding arbitration, it's going to be on everything. It is a new tool, 107, like Kate was saying. The utilization, not the fact that it's a new tool. It's been used, but in other way before. Never from a minister to force the commission to force arbitration, actually directing the commission to force the binding arbitration. And I'm in shock. I mean, I agree with the Conservative on the panel. Kate, you're totally right. I mean, but and from what I heard from Amanda, it's exactly what we all kept saying in the House when Canada Post was trying to do that, and there was back to work legislation. So the arguments that we use against the Conservative at the time, and they were talking about the economy and the stoppage. Imagine the people with Post Canada on strike or lockout, the companies who are waiting for their checks and this and that. These arguments work all the time. So I say to people, I don't want to argue about the importance of the economy and what the minister today called it, to put an end to the self-destruction of the economy. I mean, very dramatic, well rehearsed and everything. But if you're true to your words, then change the law and change their status to being an essential service. They just don't go that far because they have a hard time. At other time, if you're not close to Christmas, maybe we can live with it or not. So it's like there's a lot of hypocrisy here. They know it's going to be struck down by the federal court because it is not a judiciary use of the power that is set in 107, was never meant for that type of things. But politically, Kate was very, she talked loud, but I didn't hear Poilievre, who's quite happy to stay behind and let the Liberals imagine where the grunt of all this from the unions, from the workers, and so on. So very interesting time politically, but a lot of hypocrisy on the arguments to argue.
Well, Pierre Poilievre didn't get a double-digit lead by throwing himself in front of buses. He knows when to stay out of the way. Political ones. But Kate, just on the point you made about the back-to-work legislation, there is this privilege debate going on in the House right now that has filibustered everything. Given the stakes, I mean, Canada Post had served notice, right? They're up Friday, potentially. But, you can't have the ports shut down. I think that's an accepted economic reality. Do you think the Conservatives would even allow back-to-work legislation to happen without extracting what they want from the privilege? Would they vote for it?
Yeah, no, I'm not sure how that would go. My point around back-to-work legislation is at least you have to make the case to parliamentarians and Canadians as opposed to this kind of backdoor method with CRB. So, I think in this climate that is we're talking a lot about workers' rights. We're talking a lot about the happiness of workers. We're seeing all of this come to the fore amidst massive labor disruption, major notable ones since Trudeau has taken office. I don't know where that would go, but I think we need to be asking some more fundamental questions about why workers are so unhappy. And I think it's because their paychecks aren't going as far. And it's because inflation is so high. A lot of these unionized workers, of course, are on, they're indexed to inflation. They don't have the same negotiating power. If you want to have a conversation about inflationary policies and government spending and the things that drive up costs, that's a question for Justin Trudeau to answer. That's why workers are so unhappy. It's his policies.
Well, in this port situation, too, it's also scheduling, which affects quality of life, and that's the sort of thing they're worried, as CUPE said, that won't be dealt with by an arbitrator, and they'll be left with this unresolved until the next labor dispute.